You're listening to A Glimpse Inside on the Super Power Up Network, the show that affirms for people there is more to life, and it is possible to be happy, inspired, successful, joyous, and free.
Welcome to A Glimpse Inside. I'm Wendy Perrotti. You're listening to episode 2 of our 4-part series, Relationship Rescue. If you've missed Relationship Advice from the Trenches with Paula Jean Burns in episode 1, check it out. We dug into the everyday rough spots that relationships hit, and we shared some of our personal stories about how we handled them. Paula is truly insightful, and she's a really cool cat. It was a great conversation. My guest today has been working with me on the many ways that self-worth and the negative stories we tell ourselves and others impact the outcomes of our lives. She's yearning for deeper connection and wants a loving relationship in her life. This is really personal stuff, and sometimes it can get intense. Even knowing that, Megan gets that lots of people out there may be feeling the same way, experiencing the same struggle. And so she's agreed to let you listen in to her next 2 coaching sessions. Before we dive in, I want to address something that's important about the kind of coaching that happens on this show. This isn't about telling people what to do to fix their messy lives. First of all, life will always be messy, and that's actually okay. And secondly, in my experience, the sorts of answers that attempt to fix us are the very things that create the short-lived solutions that keep us stuck. The work we do here is about seeing ourselves, others, and life in general clearly and without judgment. It's about using that new awareness to interact in new ways, to experiment with our lives in real time. We often attempt to create solutions to our problems that are just as complex as the problems themselves. With so many moving parts, we set ourselves up for failure. Here, we look for what works in people's lives as much as we look for what doesn't, and we build on that. Just like a toddler learning to stand before he walks and walk before she runs, we're learning to live in open curiosity. We're learning to play with the elements of our lives until we find what fits us best. We're turning life itself into a laboratory for growth. And while change may be constant, growth only happens in one direction. Absolutely nothing in nature ungrows, and neither will you. So welcome, Megan. You've done quite a bit of growing yourself over the past year. But before we get to that and what you're working on now, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to tell us a bit of your story so listeners can have some context for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Wendy. I always wanted the same dream as a lot of other women to grow up and find a partner and get married and have a family, and it just didn't work out that way. I was engaged to be married in my late 20s, and I was very hurt at the end of that relationship, but I was hopeful. And by the time I was 40, I still found myself by myself alone, and I was in another relationship that I thought was quote unquote the one. And I kept experiencing this type of thing where I would be in the relationship and the person wasn't as interested in me as I might have been with them. And so because of some other things that were going on in my life work-wise, I dove into my work and I dove into my career, and I just sort of shut down, all the while longing for a relationship. And so somebody told me last night, no, this is a good thing. You're a unicorn.
And I was a unicorn, but
and I wanted to say to them, shut the hell up. Because I have found some people look down upon people who have been single for their entire adult lives. I know that my family often doesn't consider that I have, I can come and visit them because they have lives and I don't. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's hard to always come home to an empty place. And so that's just kind of, I guess, a brief overview of my story.
Yeah. And over the past year, we've been working on how that story and some of the other things that happened in your life, right, our real life experiences shape how we interact with the world around us, how those have impacted your self-worth and some of those negative stories that you have worked on shifting. So what would you say, Megan, I'll give you a chance to tell us about both the biggest story that you feel like you've sort of rewritten for yourself, and the biggest story that sort of is still lingering in that negative space.
Well, I think that when we started working together, I didn't really see it as a possibility. Now I guess I see it as a possibility, but especially lately, I'm really frustrated because I just don't take any action. Mm-hmm. Because I'm still having this emotional story of it won't make a difference. I could talk to this person online. I could meet this person for coffee. It won't make a difference.
Yeah. So the old story that you've really reshaped, and I'm going to congratulate you because you've really reshaped that one. That story that there is no hope, that it won't work, that men don't actually love women, and even if they did, none of them would love me, was a really hardwired story for you. So it's huge. It's a huge achievement that you've opened the door to possibility, to looking at your life and other people through a less critical lens, through a lens that says the past doesn't necessarily have to inform the present, or the future. And so I really want to congratulate you on that. And I bring it up now because I think that's it's important to own that as you move forward in the kind of thing that we're going to talk about, I think, today. And then that second piece, the story that says I'm not taking action, right? I'm afraid to take action. I'm going to get it wrong. That's really been in the way in your personal life, and yet not in your professional life. What's different there?
Well, I've had a lot of success in my professional life. I've certainly had ups and downs, and I've had a lot of rejection, but I seem to be able to make it work. That's not the case in my personal life. So showing up and putting myself out there in my professional life is, I know I have proof that it's going to amount to something. Showing up in my personal life, I don't have that proof. I have proof that it's not going to amount to anything.
Yeah. So, and that's so important to creating growth in our lives. The belief or the story that underpins our action is what creates our outcomes. It's why one person, and Megan, this is so insanely common in people's lives, right? We have one mindset for one component of our life and a completely different one for another component of our life, even though it's one life and we're one person. And we continue to create a body of evidence that supports those two separate mindsets, right? What you're experiencing is really real, right? Well, I keep digging in at work, and even if I get rejected, I pull myself up, I make it work, and so I feel confident. And it does work. And in relationships, that's not what happens. I put myself out there, I get rejected, I get hurt, and I put myself out there again, and the same exact thing happens again. And so we build these bodies of evidence that create the stories. Our brains don't make up stories out of nothing. They create. Our brain creates stories to explain the real life evidence, right? That's our brain is an evidence seeker, right? It takes what comes in and it uses everything in its database to create a story or an explanation for what's going on. And so the important thing that I want us to sort of focus on for a second before we get into coaching is this cycle that we're talking about of taking action and belief. Okay? Because those two things are so infrequently linked in people's minds. We want to take action, and we believe that taking action is what moves us forward. And in fact, it does, right? Clearly, nothing happens if we don't take action. But what happens is we stay in this action outcome loop, and we don't recognize that action outcome loop is being fed by a larger one. We have a belief about ourselves, about other people, and about the world around us. And those beliefs inform our thoughts, and our thoughts inform our emotions. And those emotions are actually what create those thoughts and emotions are actually what create the actions that we take in our lives. And those actions create our outcomes. So when our actions are based on a belief system that's out of alignment, or that's based on negative thinking and negative stories, what happens is we're creating actions and outcomes that don't work out for us. And that just feeds the belief system and creates this evidence loop. And so as we talk about you in relationships, we want to use the very real evidence loop that you've created in the other half of your life to help inform what changes we can start to make in that belief, thought, emotion system before you take action, as you take action. Does that make sense?
It does. And I know you and I have gone around and around in this because I seem to have some sort of a mental block because I'm a doer. So I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that's a perfect place for us to pause and take our break. We're doers, especially women, man. We are doers, and we want to dig into the doing, which is great, but not before we change the belief system. Because if you don't change that first, the doing is just going to result in the same outcomes, and it's just going to frustrate us further. So we're going to dig into that in a minute. We're going to take a really quick break. So far, I've been talking to Megan about what she's been working on. We've heard a little bit about what she wants to dive into today and what our starting point is. And when we come back from this short break, we're going to dive right into the coaching. As always, I'm going to give her and you some things that you can start playing with to help with your growth and transformation. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Don Rekla, Executive Director of Superpower Experts, and we want to thank each of you for making Superpower Up the #1 podcast network for personal development and spiritual growth. Because people like you have the courage to say that mindfulness, healthy living, disrupting reality, the pursuit of consciousness, responsible entrepreneurship, and radical parenting matter, we now amass over 1 million downloads monthly in more than 90 countries. Our numbers keep growing because there are far more people willing to live divergently than mass media wants to acknowledge. For you, the change makers, the light bearers, the way showers, we say thank you. If you're ready to take the next step in your evolution, go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the Superpower Quiz. And as Neva Lee Rekla, our youngest podcaster, likes to remind us, remember, we all have superpowers and we can change the world.
So happy to have you back with us. Today, you're listening to episode 2 of our 4-part relationship rescue series. We're diving in with Megan on some coaching. She's ready for a loving relationship in her life. And as she was telling us before the break, she's really ready to start taking some action. So Megan, let's start with the idea of action. What would action look like to you?
Well, I think a good example is I decided to go and open up an app just last week. And I started this conversation with this guy, and he responded to me, and he was very nice. And then I just didn't want to write back to him. And I do that all the time. You know, there's opportunities in front of me, and I abandon them.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's back to the narrative that I mentioned before. It won't matter, you know. It won't get me anywhere. So, you know, in a couple of instances, I had a situation a couple of months ago where I was having another conversation on a different app with a guy, and I gave him my phone number, was looking forward to talking to him, and then he went away. So it's, you know, part of it is also being in, partially it's being in a world of apps, but I'm trying to actively overcome the narrative that there's no one out there. I'm trying to actively overcome all of that type of narrative, and I do have evidence that, you know, many years ago when I was really pushing, trying to meet people using an online dating service, and then my ex-boyfriend popped up in a Starbucks. So I understand. I think that's the reason, Wendy, why I'm so focused on getting out there and doing things, because I do understand the sort of law of attraction thing. And, you know, at some point, I can't keep saying I want a relationship and not do anything to get the relationship. And that's where, and so I get really frustrated about with myself, because I mean, we had this conversation back in like July, you know, and I said at that time, it's July already.
So let's talk about for a second this most recent opportunity that came your way. Okay, because I think it really illustrates what we're talking about with action. You took action, and then the opportunity passed because the thought and belief system that you had was, I'm not writing back. I'm not doing that because it's not going to come to anything. Right? And as you talked about what you're working on to shift those beliefs, that's a lot to think about. Right? It's a lot to think about. So I'm wondering if we could just do a little experiment for a second and say, what if that conversation, that little outreach between you and this gentleman over the app was about your business, what would the thought process have been there?
Probably not. Or if it was, I could find a way to get around it.
Okay, so let's play with that, right? We want to use this part of your life that's working to sort of inform the belief system and the thought process for the part of your life that's a little bit stuck.
Okay.
So let's play with it. It's your business, and you're on this app, and there was an opportunity to connect. What would you have done?
I would have connected.
Okay. What would the thought have been that led you to connect?
How can I help? How can I serve? How can I help solve a problem that you might have? How can I do my best to come from a service place with my business?
Yeah.
How
often does that yield a good conversation or a good meeting or result for you?
Well, it doesn't always
Not always, right?
Yield work, but it does yield good conversations.
Right. So it never turns into the lasting relationship, right? But it yields good conversations. And when it does, sometimes it does lead to a relationship, right? A working relationship.
Yes.
And sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, what do you think about there?
Well, thanks partially to you. I do see it as more of just a relationship building, because I do understand that they may need me in the future, but they don't necessarily need me now. And they also may not be the right client for me. And yes, I have had that conversation with myself about dating. I can hear your thoughts.
You can hear my wheels.
She's writing that one down, folks.
Right? So this very same thing, it's so similar, right? And if this same situation were about your business, you're still putting yourself out there. I know for a fact that you're working your ass off to grow this business. I know how much this business means to you and how much of your heart and soul is in it, right? And you get rejected sometimes, and it does. And there are times that takes you down. It takes all of us down, but you bounce back. And we've heard your thinking process, your belief process around that. So let's just take that for a second. And now tell me what that would sound like if you applied it to this dating action.
I'm sorry, could you say that last one again? You kind of faded out there.
I faded out. Well, that's no good. Are we having a bandwidth issue? I hope not. Okay. I'd like to hear how you would apply that same series of thinking if we're now in the dating world, rather than the thoughts that you gave us initially. Oh, it's never going to work, so I'm not going to respond to him. How can you apply the same kind of thinking that you have with your business? What would it look like if that happened in the dating loop here?
So I know the answer that you're looking for. And
Let's start with that. Let's just start with that.
But this is what the problem is, right? So I understand that, and this is why I get stuck in this loop of having to get out there, because I understand that it's, in a lot of ways, it's a numbers game, although at this point I'm at about 457 at least. And so I get it that it's about, okay, well, that was fine, but he's not the one. Okay, well, that's interesting, but he's not that interested in me. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And I remember many years ago, my friend Karen was, had taken a class in meeting men, and the woman who taught the class was like, had this little saying of, who cares, so what next? Who cares, so what next? And Karen adopted that, and I was there the night she met her husband, and they've been married now for 15 years or something. More than that. 20 years. Anyway, so I get it. I'm just frustrated because I feel stuck. I'm not moving.
Okay, so what I heard happen there is that you jumped to the very final part of the loop. In your business loop, you said, the first thing I would do is say, how can I serve? What do we have in common? What are you looking for? You were curious. You engaged in the conversation. And from there, you said, oh, sometimes it leads to a business relationship, and oftentimes it doesn't. But in that case, right, once you got to there, your relationship thought might be, who cares, so what next? But you never even gave it a chance this time.
Right.
So you're
yes.
taking action, but your action is keeping you stuck because the thought process doesn't allow you to engage in the way that you've successfully engaged in other parts of your life.
Yes, because that's another instance of it won't matter. I can be as curious as I want to be. He'll be married, or he'll be not interested, or only interested in blondes, and by the way, the stories that I'm telling you now, I can back them up with actual dates.
Okay. So in those cases, and I'll give you that you have real evidence for that, because you do. You're not making it up. You've gone on dates and they were not interested. And perhaps they even said, I like blondes. Okay, I'll give you that. And if we followed this little thinking loop, at that point, in the places in your life where you're successful, you'd say, okay, on to the next thing. I get that. What we're not addressing is that where you're really successful in your career and in your business, Megan, is because you start not from a place of fear about you at all, but from a place of curiosity about the other person. And you, at least in what we're hearing right now, you're never getting there in the beginning of this dating sequence. So it's possible that itself leads to disinterest, right? If you did that in your business, if when you got on the phone with somebody potentially for your business and you were thinking, all right, this guy doesn't want what I have to offer. He's going to say it's too expensive. He's going to say, what would that first conversation sound like?
Well, wouldn't go very far, I guess.
It wouldn't go very far, right? So you'd be taking action. You'd be out there networking your little heart out, taking action, but constantly failing. And eventually you'd create a story that said, my business stinks. I'm too expensive. And I have proof that I'm too expensive. I have proof that what I have to offer isn't viable. I have evidence. And you'd believe that evidence and it would keep you in that loop. And that's what's happening here in the relationship side of your life. You're going in with the thought of, you're not going to like me. And so however that conversation is formed,
you're not going to like me, so let's just get this over with.
So let's just get this over with. And if you were sitting across the table from a man whose posture, facial expressions, intonation, language, stories, everything were underpinned by let's get this over with, don't you think you'd be able to read that?
Yes. And I have gone into some situations, and you know about one of them, where it wasn't that way, and he did like me, and I did like him, and I was interested in and curious about him, and it turned out he'd been dating someone for 2 years while he was dating me.
Yeah, he was a real stinker. So, but I have to tell you, my friend, that kind of proves our point. What it proves is, in that case, you showed up fully. You were engaged and curious about him. You showed yourself as interested and open and funny and brilliant, right? Because you met, I can't even think of the name of that game, like trivia. You met doing trivia, right? You showed all of those parts of yourself with no edge, with no let's get it over with, and he was interested. Just like in business, when we get that far, sometimes we find out that those people are stinkers, right? Or they're the wrong fit. So it proves that, yeah, there are lots of guys out there who are not right for you, who are not honest. But it also proves that you can get all the way to that point by responding very differently in the first half.
So I think that there's a disconnect for me, like, because I think what difference will it make? It won't get me anywhere. There's a disconnect that it's work, which it is. It's work.
Explain that for a second.
It's work for me to show up and be what you just said, curious and everything else. And if it's work to show up and be that way, and he and whoever he is interested, but then loses interest or turns out to have been dating someone for 2 years and didn't mention that fact, that's a big piece of what keeps me sitting at home at night watching TV.
Yeah.
Because it's a why bother putting myself out there, like I said earlier. So the audience is tired of listening to me now, probably, because that's the loop that I'm stuck in.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I guarantee you there are lots of people out there who are nodding their heads saying, yes, what the heck? It is a lot of work. I am tired of it. Right? There are a lot of people, Megan, who are not tired of hearing you, who are nodding their heads and saying, yeah, I totally get it. It is exhausting. Here's the kooky thing, though. You know that, I work with you as an entrepreneur, so you know that I work with people who are entrepreneurs as well. If this were a series on entrepreneurial issues, which we've got one of those coming up soon, we could be having the same conversation of someone who's got a rockin' marriage and relationship, and they would say, I cannot get my business off the ground. It's so much work to put myself out there and to be curious and to be of service and to show up over and over and over again to only be rejected before they sign the contract. They're the exact same thing. Does that make sense?
It does. I think there's also another element when you talk about the being of service part. One of the reasons that the engagement didn't work was because the only way for that relationship to work at that time with the person I was in that relationship with was for me to swallow who I was and be of total service to him.
Yeah. So I want us to be careful, and I want people listening in to really hear this. I want us to be careful about the evidence that we use about past relationships on current or future ones, because that might be 100% true. This person could have been completely incapable of owning the full glory of Megan, right? The bigness of Megan. They could have been somebody who in their life at that point, through no fault of theirs, right? We've all got our baggage, really have been made insecure by that. And so your response was to be of service, and it made you feel smaller, and it made the relationship ultimately not work. It's also possible that stories that you had at the time played into that. And because we can't know, and because people and relationships are so insanely complex, we don't want to use that as an example of evidence. We can use it as an example to play with in real time now, right? We can use it and look at it and say, what are the stories there? Right? And as a matter of fact, the first one that popped up for me is we're using kind of shared language here because we're using the business side of the house to inform how you might use what you're great at in the relationship side of the house. But in the relationship side of the house, we are of service to one another. Of course we are. It's part of being in a relationship. But that's not the primary thing. The primary goal in a business relationship is that, right? So the language of curiosity in the beginning of the relationship part is, rather than showing you that I'm here to hear how I might be of service, it's I'm here to show how I might see you fully, how I might hear you fully, how I might understand who you are fully. Because whenever we do that with another human, we kind of fall in love with them. Okay? And I'm not saying that we fall in like fairy tale love and every person that we look at in that way is somebody who we'd be in love with in that sense. But the moment that we see another human as whole, the moment that we listen to them fully without judging them, we see the best of them. We see a spark and we can love them as they are, right? And that's what people respond to in the same way that people in our business world respond to someone who is of service, who's there to really hear what they need. In our personal relationships, we respond to people who really are interested in seeing, understanding, and hearing us as we are. So right there, those conversations become relationship builders. They add, whether it ends up being somebody that you can be with or not, or that you actually like or not, or they actually dig you or not, I guarantee you that the connection would be a fun one. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then I circle back to, that is usually when I find someone that I'm really attracted to, how I go in and how I am with them. And, and then it goes back to the evidence of it doesn't get me anywhere. So the loop continues.
Okay. So I think what I'd love for you to do between now and our next session is to just play with this. You want to take action. Play with this. If you're on apps, play with this loop. Pretend that it is a business relationship. Only instead of going in with curiosity about how can I be of service, it's how can I get to know you? What is there to know about you? I'm simply curious, right? Use the language of your business relationships in the interactions that you have. And I'm going to suggest that you try it everywhere, not just in potential dating situations.
And I have been doing that because you've given me this homework more than once.
I know it takes a while, right? Okay. So, as you know, each time we play with something new, we're changing the default in our brain. You have hardwired, Megan, in your brain, these stories of it's not worth it. You have hardwired evidence that creates an instant response to stimulus. So when you're putting yourself out there and you get an inkling of discomfort, that default's going to set in. Okay, it doesn't happen on the business side of the house, but it happens on the relationship side of the house. And the reason you've had homework really similar to this over and over and over again is that only by repeating it can you change the default. Only by telling yourself a different story over and over again and building new evidence in small ways over and over again. It's that thing that we talked about in the beginning of this episode. We're not creating bibbidi-bobbidi-boo change. There's not a magic bullet. We're growing your ability to interact with people you might want to have a relationship with in the same ways that you so easily do in your professional life. And that takes repetition and it takes practice. That is the action. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I love that you're always willing to dive in, and it's why you continue to grow, why your business continues to grow, while your relationships have continued to grow, right? Maybe not love relationships yet. That's the big kahuna that we're going for, but the other ones have. So give yourself
you
credit.
love me, Wendy.
I do. I do. I see the whole picture, right? And others will too when you let them. And that's going to take some practice for you. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Cool. So I'd encourage listeners who can relate to Megan to take that homework on themselves. Go ahead and play with an area, a thinking pattern in your life where you're really rocking it, where things come easily for you, and attach it to your relationships and see if that changes anything. And I'm going to give you all a little tool that you can play with in any relationship that you have. I call this playground goggles. Throughout A Glimpse Inside, you'll hear over and over again that a critical part to transforming your life is seeing yourself through a new perspective and seeing the world around you through a new perspective. That's what creates those different thoughts that lead to different actions that lead to different outcomes. And the biggest thing that gets in our way in relationships is the armor that we've all developed over the years. Every time we get burnt, another plate in the armor. Every time we get bullied or attacked or wounded, another arrow in the quiver, right? And by the time we reach our young adulthood, we are in full plate armor with a giant quiver of weapons on our back. And we sense it in one another. When we can interact and engage with someone without the armor, without the weapons, they sense that too. and it starts to alter the conversation, even if it does in small ways. So my playground goggles that I'd like you to all try on over the next few weeks is just picture the person that you're talking to as if they're a 5-year-old. Okay? Because we can all remember being 5 or 10 or 12 or whatever that most heartfelt, tender moment of your life it was, right? We can all remember that we didn't have any ill intention. We just wanted to be seen. We just wanted to explore. We just wanted to have fun. We just wanted to be loved. And the person that you're talking to, no matter who they are, no matter how they're showing up, and that can be really contrary to that 5-year-old kid, I guarantee you that they still want to be accepted. They want to be respected. They want to be seen, heard, understood, and loved. So put on the playground goggles in your conversations and just notice what little shifts it makes in your interactions with people over the next few weeks. Megan, I want to thank you again for coming on here, for sharing so much with our listeners today, for always digging in with me and working your ass off to move things forward. We're all the same beneath the surface, and the more real we can be with one another, the more we can help one another grow. And so I really do appreciate you doing that sort of publicly so other people can grow with you. And I also want to thank all of you for listening in with us today. In fact, my friends, now it's your turn. We all have a story. If you're grappling with some stuck spots in any area of your life, or if you feel that there's more for you, but you can't quite put a finger on what that is or how to get there, whether you'd like to come on the show and get some coaching, which is free, or you'd like to just share your story with me, I'd really love to hear from you. You can go to aglimpseinside.superpowerexperts.com. It's important that you not type a www for this link. It's just aglimpseinside.superpowerexperts.com. I hope to hear from you. And Megan will be back here in 2 weeks for episode 3 of the Relationship Rescue series. We'll see what her homework looked like when she played with it in real life, and we'll help her use whatever she learned from it to keep her moving forward. Until then, big love.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the superpower quiz today.